Good afternoon, distinguished speakers. Dean Lilligreen, thank you for coming. My name is Ron Brand. I'm a professor here at the School of Law, and I'm also the academic director of our Center for International Legal Education. And I welcome all of you to this special event. This program, Italy and Pennsylvania in Economic Dialogue, is special for a number of reasons. First of all, it brings together a wonderful group to discuss a relationship that has been important to Western Pennsylvania and to Pittsburgh for over a century. Second, it provides an opportunity for cooperation between the cities of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. This event is part of Ciao Philadelphia, a series that is being held to acknowledge the relationships between Pennsylvania and Italy. And to my knowledge, it's the only one event for Ciao Philadelphia that's held outside of Philadelphia. Perhaps next year we'll have a Ciao Pittsburgh. Third, as you'll see from the distinguished group of panelists we have here for our roundtable, the event also brings together very nicely the University of Pittsburgh School of Law and the Duquesne University School of Law, and that's something that I think is really important in this city. I want to thank those who have made the event possible, most notably one person who has been the behind-the-scenes organizer for the event, without whom it would not have happened, and that's Professor Alice Stewart. Alice, thank you. And we want to thank our financial sponsors, Eckerd Siemens, Fox Rothschild, and K&L Gates. Obviously, that kind of support makes these things happen when otherwise they could not. We also thank the Duquesne University School of Law, the Pitt Law School, and the Center for International Legal Education, and the Italian Consul General, Mr. Andrea CANEPARI. Our format today is that of a roundtable. Our moderator, Governor CORBETT, will lead the discussion, first among the panelists here in the front of the room, and later with questions from the audience. We will then turn at 5 p.m. We'll move from our formal discussion here to our informal discussion up in the Alcoa room on 2nd floor and a reception. But let me begin by briefly introducing all of our speakers so that we may proceed without interruption of what I think will be a very interesting discussion. The Honorable Andrea CANEPARI graduated in 1998 from the University of Parma Law School, which, by the way, is where one of our L.L.M. graduates teaches. Mr. CANEPARI received his L.L.M. degree from the University of Pennsylvania the following year and joined the Italian Foreign Service in that same year, 1999. He has been posted as First Secretary for American Politics and Relationships with the U.S. Congress and First Secretary for Political Affairs at the Italian Embassy in Washington. He has also served in Rome as counselor and diplomatic advisor to the state minister within the Italian presidency for the Council of Ministers, and as alternate director of the North America Division, Political Affairs and Security Bureau at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And he has served as Consul General of Italy in Philadelphia since August of 2013. Governor Tom Corbett probably needs no introduction in this room. He received his bachelor's degree from Lebanon Valley College and his J.D. from St. Mary's University School of Law. After serving as assistant district attorney in Allegheny County, he was then appointed as an assistant to the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania in 1980. He did some time in private practice, and then became the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. In 1995, he was appointed to fill the Pennsylvania Attorney General vacancy, and he later was elected Attorney General in both 2004 and 2008. In 2011, he became the 46th Governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Nicholas CAFARDI is Dean Emeritus of the Duquesne University School of Law. We at Pitt Law claim him as well. He received his J.D. from the University of Pittsburgh and is also a former assistant dean here at Pitt Law. He also holds a doctorate of canon law from the University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome. He has served as general counsel for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Pittsburgh and Duquesne University. As one of the country's foremost lay canon lawyers, he has represented other Catholic dioceses, archdioceses, and religious orders across the nation. The founding chair of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's Committee on Racial and Gender Bias, he was also an original member and chair of the United States Catholic Bishops' National Review Board for the Protection of Children and Youth. Antonio LORDI is Senior Contracts Manager at Siemens Industry USA and an adjunct professor at the Duquesne University School of Law. He holds law degrees from the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of Naples, as well as Duquesne University. His work and teaching include the areas of international business transactions, international trade law, and European Union law, and he has published books and articles on these topics and currently focuses his work, I'm told, on back-to-back and flow-down contracts. Philip Rinaldi joins us from Philadelphia, where he's Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board of Philadelphia Energy Solutions, LLC. He earned his BS and MS degrees in chemical engineering from the New Jersey Institute of Technology. He is an entrepreneurial industrialist whose career has focused on energy, chemical, and natural resources industries. Prior to his current position, he has held positions at Exxon, Fibro, Tosco, Coffeyville Resources, Conserve, and other major companies. So I think we have a wonderful group for the discussion that we have ahead of us, but right now, without further interruption, I'm going to invite Consul General CANEPARI to set the stage for our discussion.
Thank you so much, Professor Ron Brand, for this introduction and for the opportunity for me for being here today. I'd like also to thank Professor Ron Ritchie for organizing the program and for all the speakers, of course, Governor CORBETT, Dean CAFARDI, Professor LORDI, and my Philadelphia friends, Philip Rinaldi. I'd like to thank everybody also for being here, the University of Pittsburgh School of Law and Duquesne School of Law. It is really a great privilege for me to address the public in Pittsburgh. It's a vibrant city with a great Italian-American population, with a lot of Italian coming here for being researchers or working in companies, and I feel a true friendship for Italy. So I think it's the perfect place for building bridges toward Italy. And since my few hours in Pittsburgh, I sense that you have an expertise in building bridges. So let's try also to think about other kind of bridges that can be built. Economic bridges, academic bridges, cultural bridges. That's why we are here. And really these bridges like to build these bridges toward contemporary Italy. And if we build bridges with Italy, we can also reach out to the European Union. And doing that, raising even more the international profile of Pittsburgh and of Pennsylvania generally. So that's why I'm very excited. This opportunity gives me the possibility to see how we can cooperate even more in the sector of the future, such as energy, thanks to giants and friends of Italy, such as Philip Rinaldi. I think that opportunities can arise from TTIP, and the panelists, which are much more experts than I am, will explain more why this treaty, if signed, can really increase not only the trade, but the dialogue between Pennsylvania and Italy and Europe. So I think we have to believe more in international opportunities. I sense that in Philadelphia, but I think it's, generally speaking, it's good for all Pennsylvania. We have to believe more, and I say we because I feel, I'm Italian, 100%, but now I feel I'm a little bit Pennsylvanian. I love Pennsylvania. I studied at a university called University of Pennsylvania. I love people here and says we have a lot of opportunities toward Italy. But I think we have to believe a little bit more in international opportunities. And that's why we are here. That's why you are here. I think Italy and Pennsylvania are really perfect together. We share historical links and a profitable common path toward the future. But we have also, yes, a long history. In 1791, an Italian state, Genoa, appointed the first Italian Consul General in the US, and it was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And since then, Italy is the only European country, and actually it's the only country, to maintain a career office consulate general in Pennsylvania. We have not only my office in Philadelphia, but also we have a great honorary consul who is here, Professor Lucente. So Italy, that's another sign how Italy believes in Pennsylvania. We have to remember that 12% of people in Pennsylvania claim to be of Italian heritage, according to the US Census. And I met few people before, and I sensed an Italian last name. And there is an Italian influence, not only in buildings, food, architecture, design, but also in the way of living. And I think that's important, and it could be a way to help in creating stronger relationship. And now, and also, again, we can see Professor Lordi, we have now Italian professors, managers, doctors, and also Italian researchers in Pennsylvania's hospital universities, and so many at University of Pittsburgh and Duquesne University. So these people can help in creating more economic and cultural opportunities. And then, finally, our economic systems are complementary. Our economies, luckily for us, are not competing, and we can partner in order to gain new markets worldwide. If the TTIP treaty, sorry, I didn't said it before, it's the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, will be signed between the European Union and the US, our GDPs in Italy and here in the US, but also specifically in Pennsylvania, will raise because of the trade and investment barriers that will be destroyed. According to a Bertelsmann Foundation study, Pennsylvania will be among the top 5 US states to benefit for TTIP-related new jobs. According to the study, 33,960, I don't know why 960, new jobs will be created in Pennsylvania. The successful implementation of this treaty is estimated to increase Pennsylvania export to EU by 29.8%, especially in chemical, pharmaceutical, and metal sectors. And I witnessed firsthand these potentials when in 2014, Italy, then having the presidency of the European Union, picked for the first time Pennsylvania for the annual European Union business mission to the US. Usually they go to New York, to Miami, Florida, to California, to Illinois. But for the first time, when we had the presidency, Italy picked Pennsylvania. And I saw the enthusiasm among business, this business delegation. They were not aware about the potentiality. And so there was a surprise effect. They were very, very, very happy about that. But what we can do together in order to benefit more from these opportunities? First of all, I believe that we have to raise awareness here and in Italy and in Europe. We have to know a little bit more about the benefits of a more structured partnership. That's why we are here, and that's why we created, and I say we because a lot of friends of these Italian cultural months are here. We have Philo RINALDI, Philadelphia Energy Solution. we have Bernie Mongilio and Frank from CGI and Fabrizio Franco, that it's another sponsor, that believes in this process. Other sponsors are big American companies such as American Airlines and KPMG. So why these companies are giving us money? Because they believe that, not to me, the money, it's for the Italian mans, because they believe that celebrating the Italian contribution to this region, the success of Italian Americans, they are raising even more the international profile of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. So Ciao is an occasion to build bridges again and opportunities in different sectors, including culture, academic, and business. 2016 edition will have more than 70 events, and I'm very happy that we have one so important with such great panelists in Pittsburgh. And just a few examples of events that we had in Philadelphia. If you want to come and stop by, we have Italian tours at Philadelphia Museum of Art, Italian tour made by the Rangers at Independence National Park, where the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were signed. So they celebrate, they remember the Italian cultural contribution to the founding fathers for the first time. And so I think these are good messages, and putting together all these excellencies of Pennsylvania, it's a way to let the people worldwide to appreciate more this region. And I'm confident, and in the framework of these Italian months, Ciao, the Italian more academic and business partnership will be forged. And a new interest was created here and in Italy. And I'm very confident when I say that Italy believes in Pennsylvania. But with your support, we will create new concrete opportunities in economic, business, and academic field. So just to let you a little bit grasp what happened, especially in Philadelphia, I'd like to show you two videos. The first one is a little bit Philadelphia-centric, so I'm sorry. Next year we will do, maybe it'll be wonderful to have something here in Pittsburgh. So if we can see this first video. So forgive me if it was a little bit Philadelphia-centric, but it's a way just to let you appreciate how the Italian influence is everywhere, from the national park to the museums, and so many universities were involved in these months. And I'd like to show you a second video about Italy, actually, contemporary Italy. Because the question is, why are we here? Are we creating bridges because we love the history and we are emotionally attached to Italy, or there is something more? I don't know if you listen to President Obama in his speech at the White House during the state dinner that he offered to Prime Minister of Italy, Renzi. And he mentioned Filippo Mazzei, a diplomat, friend of Jefferson, an influencer of some of the most important principles of the Declaration of Independence. But he mentioned also Sunday dinner, the Italian Sunday dinner. So is just for that we are here, or there is something more? Are there opportunities? What is Italy now? So let's see the second video. So I hope that I gave you a few reasons to think about a different image of Italy and a new way to engage Italy to create opportunities. So again, thank you very much, and let's hear the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. CANEPARI. Before we go on, I don't want to miss the opportunity to mention one of the bridges that you talked about between Italy and the United States. For those of you who are lawyers in the audience, we invite you to cross that bridge and join us next May in Vicenza for a one-week program in transnational commercial agreements, litigation, and arbitration. Get almost 2 years of CLE credit, Pennsylvania CLE credit, in 1 week in a wonderful place. And with nice opportunities on the weekends on either end, too. And with that, Governor Corbett, you have the floor. Vicenza.
Now? Oh. Okay. How many students do we have here? I always want to talk to the students. How many of the students here have been to Italy? Quite a number. How many want to go? Everybody's hand in this room should be up. How many people have never been to Italy? If I can give you any advice, Andrea, I think you'd agree with this. You need to find time. You may need to make it a bucket list, and a sooner bucket list rather than a later bucket list, and to go to Italy. I had the unique opportunity on one occasion to go to Italy, and on another occasion I was returning a gift from my wife, returning a favor. My wife gave me a trip to my family's homeland, Ireland, for my 60th birthday. And when she was getting ready to turn 60, a little more than a year later, I said, well, do you want to go to Germany, because she's of German background? She says, no, I want to go to Italy. Well, it took another year or two, but I had the opportunity to take a trade mission, and I believe heavily in trade for Pennsylvania, for the United States. And we took a trade mission, not to Italy, but to France and Germany. And I will tell you, if you go on a trade mission, be prepared to work. And we worked. We did 47 meetings in 5 days. And other people that were on a trade mission, we arranged for them to have separate meetings, both in Paris, and Lyon, Stuttgart, and Dusseldorf is where we went in Germany. When it was over, you can imagine we were quite exhausted. But we took our personal vacation then and went over to Venice, Florence, and Rome. Took the train over the mountains in the daylight. And unfortunately, I slept half the way. But we went over the mountains and into Venice was the first trip. To show you it's a small world, I was standing around in the cabin. You know, the cabins, the walkways on one side and the cabins over here. We had a cabin, and I was talking to my wife, stretching my legs. And 2 cabins away, I hear somebody say, Governor Corbett? It was a farmer from Lancaster County, very big into eggs. He was going to a trade mission, a trade fair in farming over in Italy at the same time. To show you that there is a connection. So we spent 2 days in Venice. We then went to Florence, and some friends of ours from Pittsburgh joined us in Florence. And the wife is somewhat eccentric. For those of you who know Laura Ellsworth, you'll agree with me on that. And she had found out that there was this great guide from over there that a lot of Pittsburghers used, and he took us for a day and a half, 2 days, through Florence and 1 day in Rome. And it was a wonderful trip. But the next time I went over, it was at the request of the Archbishop of Philadelphia to go meet the Pope and invite the Pope to come to Philadelphia. And as you know, in September of last year, he came to Philadelphia. And we went over, we had a wonderful couple days in Rome. But at the same time, there was a paper company out of the town of Lucca that was looking at some sites in Bucks County, just outside of Philadelphia. Unfortunately, I don't think we won that, but they wanted to come over and see me, and I said, how about if I go see you? Because I'm going to be over there already. So I extended it. We went to Lucca. We went to Assisi. We went to Montepulciano. Traveled all over that section of what would I call that, southwest Tuscany, pretty much. Went to a winery. Dean went to this one winery on top of Montepulciano. We were supposed to be there. It was 6 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday. Supposed to be there for an hour and a half. It was just myself, my wife, our troopers, the Carabinieri that were with us. it ended at 9 instead of an hour and a half later. They kept bringing us more things, and then we drove back home to Rome at that point in time. So I have very vivid memories, but it made me think about what the relationship is between not only the United States, but particularly Pennsylvania and going over to Italy, and areas of Italy that I've never gotten to, but I intend to get to. But trade is a good way. Yes, we have tourism. That's trade to a certain extent. But we have this new trade agreement that's being discussed. Put that there. Let's go over here. We got something going on right now called a presidential election 2 weeks from today. And I don't know how, one way or the other, whoever wins, that's going to affect trade, because trade has become an issue because of the other trade agreements. We have a natural relationship trading with Europe on many different things. And I think that's one of the reasons we have this conversation here today. CHAL Philadelphia I was familiar with. I have attended CHAL Philadelphia in the past. My good friend fromRONALD is very involved in that. And it makes sense to me that we see that happen here in Pittsburgh. We have a strong Italian community, strong areas, our Bloomfield area. Actually, the lower hill, years ago, before the Civic Arena was built, was an Italian area. I remember my father used to get meats from an Italian grocer down there. So the discussion here is going to be a kind of a free-flowing. They've written all these questions for me. I might use them, okay? But now I want to test. I'm going to throw an open question to the panel. Who can, in less time than I just took, describe to everybody what this trade agreement is? Ron, I'll look at you first.
Well, this trade agreement is a culmination of a long historical process. And trade agreements these days, during election campaigns, seem to get a pretty bad rap. But this trade agreement builds on prior trade agreements. It builds on the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade that was finished in 1947. It builds on the WTO agreements that were established at the end of the Uruguay round in the 1990s. It builds on experience that both the EU and the U.S. have had negotiating other trade agreements, including the agreement that now seems to be stalled because of Wallonia with Canada.
Because of what?
Because of a vote in part of Belgium that is holding the whole matter up. But it has a number of factors. One, primarily, it builds on the process of breaking down trade barriers at the border. This starts with tariffs. Tariffs have been substantially and significantly reduced over time because of the gap in the WTO, but they still exist and they still make a difference between the U.S. and Europe, particularly on specific products. It also has rules on regulation and the ability on each side to impose regulations that have impact on the process of trade, as well as the process of unifying that regulation process. It has rules as well on investment, protection of investment by investors from each side in sorry about that, in the territory of the other. And that leads to the final aspect of it, which is dispute settlement. It has provisions for dispute settlement, for disputes between member states of the EU and the US, or between the EU and the US, but as well for disputes between private investors and the host state, no matter which direction that goes. So it has a lot of provisions that trade lawyers tend to like, because they all are designed first to make trade flow more easily, but then also to make disputes that result from that flow of trade and flow of investment easier to resolve.
There's a great discussion going on about all this trade, whether it's the Pacific Rim trade, whether it's NAFTA, this trade. And there are those here in this country and in other places in the world that would talk about, isn't this globalization of our economy? And I think some would say that the economy is, to a certain extent, already globalized. Professor, mean, those who are opposed to this, tell us about that.
Yes, I mean, if I may clarify or maybe confuse you a little bit more. The general issue is about, an integrated global economy. And there are a lot of news, we read a lot on the news, but there is no clarification on what are the real issues out there. So, first of all, I think that United States and European Union have a different approach to globalization. I see Europeans more concerned about social problems, end of democracy. The word of globalization is the word of the big corporations who will come to Europe and will take over. We will not be represented anymore in Congress because they will cannot represent us anymore because the big corporation will have the full power in our nation. In America, I see more the politicians, also experts, I should say, of trade and economy, international economy, talking more about an individualistic approach and say, we will lose jobs. We have lost a lot of jobs. The truth of the matter is that globalization definitely brought issues that we didn't know before. Like, I mean, if we count China, since it joined the WTO in 2001, probably 2 million jobs moved to China. So that's a fact, and that is very difficult to dispute. But on the other side, we have also other things that happened. First of all, a lot of jobs were lost not because China and not because global economy, but because the cost of automation decreases tremendously in the last 20 years. Is what they call disruptive technology. A lot of new technology came out, and so a lot of jobs were not there anymore. So what nobody has discussed so far, I don't see a lot of that in the papers, is about labor policies that should be done. Germany, for instance, spent 0.6% of the GDP in trying to train employees to do new jobs. United States spends only 0.1% of the GDP. But there are other things that involve the integrated global economy, I would say, and are we talking about economy, because this is an economic dialogue, or are talking about social issues? What I noted, where scholars have noted, that recently all the anti-global movement try to focus more on the fact that globalization is seen as a sort of a threat to social cohesion. So, of course, the post-terror attack to the United States, the refugee, the religious issue, all this stuff has nothing to do with economy and is not a threat to economy. Actually, United States, Britain, did fairly well in the last year in terms of economy, in terms of unemployment. It's fairly low compared to other economies. However, there is this fear that globalization can really affect, our social issues, our social goals as a society. And there's one more thing we note in the papers. Everybody discussing about trade deficit. I mean, also the presentation of Consul CANEPARI was pointing out about how on trade Italy is doing fairly well, is doing well. But in reality, surplus of trade and trade policies have more to do with savings and investment rather than jobs. In other words, you can fix the trade deficit of the United States, but you will still may have a problem with jobs. And the policy can go towards a direction, again, of more saving, less investment, but probably this is not what Americans want anyhow. So I would say what we live now, it's a moment, in my opinion, where we are trying to understand what are these issues that globalization brought to the world. Are new issues. We were not prepared. A lot of books out there, but nobody really give us the recipe on how to solve this problem. So this is actually what we are doing, try to figure out what we can do to improve globalization. But as you were saying at the beginning, we can't go back in time. There is not a time machine where we can be totally anti-global, and because we have this issue, we just don't face them and try to go back in time. I don't know if I...
Okay. No. I have something that I rail against a little bit, and that's called the internet. And sometimes I consider many of our problems that we see going like that are caused by that information technology going around the world so fast that people don't have time to think about what they're sending before they hit the send button. Whether it's in politics, 3 o'clock in the morning tweets from presidential campaigns, to children sending things that they shouldn't send, to countries hacking other countries' database. And I think it's going to have an effect on trade at some point in time. The items of trade, though, can vary. I mean, tourism I consider to be a trade. We go to Italy, Italians come to here and everywhere else. And oh, I wanted to bring up, you showed the great picture of Independence Hall. If I don't do this, my wife will shoot me because she's on the board of the Museum of the American Revolution. It's in Philadelphia. It will be opening next spring. It's the only museum dedicated to the history of the American Revolution. I think, Phil, you're involved in that. It's 2.5 blocks from Independence Hall, right down Chestnut Street, I believe is the street. It's where I now call the beginning of the Independence Trail. I know the media people over there don't like that, but you start at the museum and then work your way to Carpenter's Hall, work your way to Independence Hall, then across the mall to Constitution Hall, if you want to get the taste of independence in this country. Commercial's done, okay? One of the areas of trade that you brought up was energy. And we have somebody with us that knows a little bit about energy. I met him, was that 2012, Phil? I was approached as governor by the Carlyle group. We had, I think it was March of 2012, Sunoco had announced they were going to close the refineries in Philadelphia. Now, for those of you who have been to Philadelphia, if you've flown in, you come in the expressway from Philadelphia, you have to go past the refineries. You can see them before you get into the city. Sitting in my office when they told me that, all I could visualize is what happened to us here in Pittsburgh when the steel mills closed. And they just sat there like skeletons waiting for something to happen as we came in either parkway. And what would that do to the collective psychic, not only of Philadelphia, but all of southeastern Pennsylvania, Delaware, and South Jersey? It would have a devastating effect. The gentleman, and I forget his name, who was running Sunoco after Brian McDonald, made a good faith effort to find a buyer. And an angel came by. And it was a company called the Carlyle Group. And they came to me saying, number one, you're a Republican governor, can you work with the Obama administration? And I said, I'm a governor and I can work with the president. And that's what's extremely important, especially on behalf of the people of Pennsylvania and, quite honestly, the entire tri-state area there. And we had a number of meetings. Frankly, the United Steelworkers, which is the union inside there, came up to the governor's office because I tend to be the guy that does things behind the scenes, so we weren't real public. I've learned my lesson, I think. And they were protesting me. They were protesting outside the governor's residence. They didn't know I wasn't there. At the time, I was actually down in Philadelphia, and I think I was having some conversations with the Carlyle Group. But we had to do everything very quietly behind the scenes. But then the Carlyle Group got involved. We had meetings with the Representative Gene Sperling from the White House Economic Advisor, and they took a risk. And Phil, can you tell them about that? The other footnote is, after this happened, I went into the Union Hall in Delaware County of the United Steelworkers, and I got a standing ovation, which is very unusual for a Republican governor to get a standing ovation in the Union Hall. So, Phil?
Thank you, Governor. First of all, I'm unique up here. I'm not a lawyer, so I hope you can understand me. You know? And before I address your direct question, I wanted to tell some of these students in particular who haven't been to Italy what my experience is of a Pittsburgher who goes to Italy. So some years ago, Governor Corbett was getting some kind of an award. I'm at an event. He's up on the stage with his lovely wife, and they're being feted, and I'm down in the audience, and he catches my eye, and he comes rushing over to me, and he said, "Phil, I just got back. You know, I was in Italy. I was in Rome. It was wonderful. I was in the Piazza Navona." I said, "Oh, this is great. The Piazza Navona, you know, you have the fountain, the Quattro Fiumi, the four rivers. You have the wonderful Egypt, you know, blindfold over the eyes." He said, No. Just a block away, there's a bar that's full of Pittsburgh Steelers stuff." So,
There's no Eagle Bar there, though.
there's no Eagle Bar there. So I started out as a Jersey guy, and there ain't no Giant Bar there either. So there's a lot of perspective, and I might just to kind of keep a little bit of nexus here with the main topic and globalization. There is probably no industry in the world that has been more globalized and for a longer period of time than the energy industry. Absolutely, things that happen, a conversation takes place halfway around the world, media covers it, and prices change instantly around the globe. You have this, incredible kind of price discovery, incredible connectivity that happens, and there are lots of little mini arbitrages which occur. It's what makes the business a very interesting business, but it's really a model for what happens in globalization. You have to learn to live with that. You have to learn that you are not an island, and you've got to be somehow connected. And if you don't respond to that connectivity, you don't get anywhere. But Governor, to answer your question here directly, in Philadelphia, these two oil refineries, was something called the Girard Point and the Point Breeze oil refineries. They occupy this incredible site. It's on about 1,350 acres of property that spans both banks of the Schuylkill River from the airport until Center City. My office is in the iconic Mellon Bank Center, and it's literally a 10-minute ride to those facilities. Quite unique in the world to have industrial facilities like that so close to a major city. And they're important. That refining complex is the largest oil refining complex anywhere on the eastern seaboard. Not in the Canadian Maritimes, not anywhere here on the east coast of the United States. You have to get all the way around into the Gulf of Mexico before you find something else that's of that scale. And does it matter? These refineries are a major supplier of gasoline and diesel fuel and heating oil into the Pittsburgh area. Comes in here by pipeline. So it's a kind of a major hub in a distribution for these things. And yeah, it was being slated to be bulldozed. There was actually a plan in place to try to convert that site to condominiums and a football stadium. So we thought this industrial activity was a much better activity to have in here, and we've been very fortunate in what we've done. We created a terrific coalition with both the Democrats and the Republicans at the federal level, certainly at the state level, with Governor Corbett foursquare behind it, the United Steelworkers. Not only was the governor recognized, in that same year, I was given by the United Steelworkers, the Business Leader of the Year award to get a union to give a CEO that kind of award and a governor that kind of recognition. It's really quite extraordinary. But it was all about, coming in and saving jobs. And have we successfully done that? I think we have. There were 903 employees at these facilities when we took it over. Today, we have just under 1,200, 1,150 employees in here. So we've actually been able to kind of build the workforce in that period of time. But that's not to say that there aren't some bumps in that road. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit later. But the good news is that an important energy business was saved, and that energy business really does have a nexus here into Pittsburgh. And when Andrea CANEPARI talks about building bridges, one of the things that I want to talk about a little bit later here is the bridge that we're trying to build between the western and the eastern part of the state here on energy and energy pipelines and energy hub, because I too have protesters. They carry my big picture of my head around, and they call me dirty fossil Phil with a heart of shale, and I tell them I love it, you know. So I'm all about that shale revolution, which has made us much closer to energy independence.
There was also another refinery right down the road at the same time. And the uniqueness about that one, that was Marcus Hook. I don't even know who the owner, I don't recall the owner of that. Conoco.
So you had two there,
Yeah.
right? So one was Sunoco, that Sunoco Logistics has repurposed here into an LPG facility, taking Marcellus LPGs out, and the other was Conoco, which is now Delta Airlines.
And Delta Airline bought it out in a very unique deal. They refine their own aviation fuel there. But I think the deal was with the other carriers that come into Philadelphia Airport. They get their gas from there, and in other airports, Delta gets their gas from whether it's United or American or whatever. All of that was done in the space of 12 months. But we'll come back to it. Energy, we have been the recipient of energy from the Mideast for decades. Yet we are the largest energy field in the world. And that whole field is changing because of the shale play, because of the development of the sands, the oil sands up in North Dakota and is that Alberta, I think, in
Alberta,
Canada. Those two areas. It's really changing. And it's going to change how all these goods and products are made that are going to be shipped out of the country. The same thing's going on in other countries around the world, how those goods and products can be made coming into this country. One of the products that comes into this country, and I worked really hard as governor to make it easier, and we just didn't get it done, and that was called getting rid of the state store system. How many of you would like to see the state store system go away, just out of curiosity? Put your hands up. Who's the one person that doesn't? No offense to them. But eventually we're starting to see some movement in that because we pushed and pushed. And let's get into the 21st century when it comes to the delivery of alcohol, spirits, beer, and wine. And I think Italy might be known for a little bit for wine. I can tell you the wine we have from Montepulciano was absolutely delicious. We had it sent back. We mailed it to a state store. We paid our taxes on it. And I think we just finally went through our last bottle of it. And the ability of our nation and our state to become more closely tied to wine-producing countries around the world, but particularly Italy, really falls, I think, to the smaller and mid-sized businesses. And Dean, I think you might have an interest in that.
We're finally talking about something important. the importation of Italian wine into Pennsylvania. 2 years ago, I started a business called Aventine Imports. Aventine, like the hill in Rome, Aventine Imports. And we have agreements with around between 20 and 30 Italian producers of wine. And they're mostly the smaller people, because by the time I got into the business, all the major companies were already well taken care of. I'm sure if you go into the state store, you'll see Antinori, you'll see Frescobaldi, you'll see Cavett, you'll see Folonari and Bolla. I mean, those guys I call them the industrial wine producers, because they produce wine in the tens of millions of bottles. But America buys a lot of Italian wine. Last year, we bought $1.5 billion of Italian wine. And the biggest share of that, in terms of comparing percentages, was Pennsylvania. And the reason for Pennsylvania, though, is because of the state store system, because we have one buyer who's buying for, 10, 11 million Pennsylvanians.
Hopefully only about 7 million. The other ones are maybe too young.
Underage, okay. So we're dealing with the smaller producers, and it's been a lot of fun. Right now we have 3 wines on the state store shelves. The problem is getting the state store to reorder things. There's absolutely no certainty when you deal with them that they like a wine, they buy it once, that they'll buy it again. So we're going through that problem right now, and The governor, I'm sure, knows that with the reorganization of the LCB with the most recent legislation, they seem to be extremely confused.
More confused than normal, but
Yes, they really don't know what their job is going to be, and they're people of goodwill. I mean, the folks we deal with in Harrisburg are hardworking, decent Pennsylvanians, but the system is not the best. But anyhow, we've managed to convince them to take at least 3 of our wines, all from small producers. Well, that's what we've really focused on. Again, as I said, it wasn't necessarily our choice. The big producers were already gone. But we represent regional producers in Lazio, the area of Italy where I have a home, in Abruzzo, which is on the east coast of Italy. And we just recently gotten some from southern Italy. But the problem with the LCB is they don't know I don't think they know how wine is made. We just got a major order from the LCB at the end of August, and they wanted it shipped like in 2 weeks. Well, August is the harvest season in Italy, right? You deal with these small wineries, huh? You say, okay, we want 3,000 bottles of this, and they say, but everybody's in the field. And the small producers do that. That means the same crew that works the bottling plant is the same crew that's out in the fields harvesting the grapes, is the same crew that when they bring the grapes back, crushes the grapes and makes the wine, huh? So when the crew's out in the field, there's nobody back in the bottling plant to take the wine out of the stainless steel storage vats, put them in bottles, put labels on, and send them to the United States. You know, you would think somebody that was importing wine would have the sensitivity to the year of the grape, huh? And major orders during harvest season are just hard to. Now the industrial wineries, you know, things like Antinori and Frescobaldi and Cavett and Bolla and all the rest. I mean, they're so big that no matter when you ask them for a product, they have it. But if you're asking a smaller company for a product, you know, it's really based on the year of the grape, huh? But they did put an order through, and if I could put a plug in, they actually ordered a wine that should be on the shelves by Thanksgiving. It's called Rosé. It's really a Cerasuolo from Montepulciano, a nice, deep, dark red rosé that will go perfect with turkey meat. I just hope it'll be on
is
the.
that the same winery, the one at the top of the hill?
No, you were drinking Brunello, I'm sure, Governor, which I don't have anything as good as Brunello. I have good stuff, but not that good.
So, in that, you have obviously the problems with dealing with trade with our LCB. But in my notes here that people gave to me, so I want to thank all of those who wrote the questions for me. I imagine they have similar to our small business over in Italy. And what's your experience been with the Italians
Well, as I
in
said,
dealing with the importation of goods here?
well, first of all, they would love to have their wines sold in the United States. The Italians are very favorable to Americans. I'm sure anybody that's traveled into Italy knows that they really do like Americans. And to have a product on the shelves in the United States for them is a cachet, especially because, as I said, I'm dealing with smaller producers. These are guys that make 90,000, 100,000 bottles of wine a year. They're not the giants. So if I can do a sale to Pennsylvania, as we have, of 2,000 or 3,000 bottles, that's really it's a big thing for them. So you get a lot of their attention, which is really very, very nice. But again, you're typically dealing with folks who, because they are small producers, the same crew does everything, which in a way is, when you think about it, for quality control is wonderful. Huh? I mean, they have phenomenal quality control on their wines because there's a small crew that's basically on top of everything all the time. So it's been great dealing with the small and medium-sized producers. I think they want access to the American market. They like the cachet of the American market, and I found them to be extremely flexible. The company I mentioned that had the wine in the vats but not in the bottles, they actually brought in part-time workers just to get the wine in the bottles for us so that they could be shipped by the LCB shipping date.
Would the TTPI, all right, have an effect on your importation process?
Well, it would do away with the duties, and that's important, huh?
So how much would we save on a bottle of your wine?
Well, you know, this is funny. No, this isn't Pennsylvania, this isn't the LCB, this is the federal government. The duty gets paid by the carton. It gets paid by the carton. So, and this is funny because the Italians typically package their wines in cartons of 6 bottles. You go into an Italian wine store, the wines, I mean, you buy wines, it's in a 6 bottle box. You know, America, we don't do anything like that small, right? We want everything in cases of 12 bottles, right? Okay. So our duty is by the unit. Doesn't matter if it's 12 in a unit, doesn't matter if it's 6 in a unit. So if my Italian guys are shipping bottles to me in boxes of 6, huh, I'm paying twice the duty on that wine as I would pay if they shipped it in containers of 12. So I need to tell them, you need to help yourself by changing how you box your wines. And they say, this doesn't make sense. And I say, you're right, this doesn't make sense. But it's the federal government, and this is how they assess their duties. So if you want to be able to sell your wine for $1 cheaper a bottle, then you need to put it in a container of 12. And of course, again, since it's the same guys doing everything, you know, when you visit these places and you see the wine coming off the bottling machine, there's no machine that picks up the bottles and puts them in the boxes. There's a person there, huh? So it really just depends on changing the size of the box that they put the bottles in. And we've had really good luck. Only one producer, a very, very small producer down in Calabria, wasn't able to get cases of 12. But the rest have all switched over to 12 cases of 12 bottles and have cut in half what their normal duty would be. But I'd love to see it go away. You know, it's really, when you think about it, it's crazy to tell somebody, you got to ship. You can't give me 2 boxes of 6. All right, you've got to ship in a box of 12.
Can you help him with that, counsel? Can you go back to the company and say, come on, you guys, if you're going to market in the United States, you need to figure this out?
Suggestion.
Yeah. I'll get my notes here. With this potential trade agreement, and Phil, I'll come back to you. With this potential trade agreement, what are the disputes that could arise with this agreement? And is there I'm a novice when it comes to trade, except I spend my money on things. Is there a threshold before it takes effect, a financial threshold, or is it all trade? It's a toss-up question to the two of you.
I think the big issue we have the big issue we have with this agreement is that I will try to narrow down what Professor Brand was saying before. So this is more a non-tariff barrier agreement. In other words, what this agreement is trying to do is to bring down all the barriers to the trade between the European Union and the US that have to do with the rules. And on the other side, to protect investments. So the rules, what are these rules? Who has more rules, Europeans or Americans? Well, Europeans, I see more the perspective of Europeans. I mean, when I analyze these things, I have 2 issues. One that very close to Dean CAFARDI one about the wine, which is what Europeans call geographical indications. This is a big issue for Europeans. Europeans have this concept that if a product comes from a certain territory, okay, and follows certain process and procedure, is by itself needs to be protected. But not just as a trademark, like in the US, because that's what we have in the US, trademark protection, but it's much more than that. It's the fact that the product comes from that territory. As Italian, you know, sometimes I get shocked, you know, when you go to the grocery store and you see things like arborio-style rice. What means? Arborio rice is a rice that is produced in Italy in a certain region. That's it. I remember a friend of mine used to make wine here in Pittsburgh, and he said, Antonio, look what I do, Chianti. No, you can't do Chianti. Chianti comes from the region of Chianti. Now, I have to say, recently in the United States, also governors of state are trying to trademark some of their products, like the Idaho potatoes or things like that. But the geographical indication is something that Americans, of course, have a problem with, because it's limiting a lot local producer, to do things using certain ingredients as certain things. And on the other side, I think the big issue is regarding these technical standards that protection rules that there are in Europe that prevent American products to be exported. Like certain meat done with certain hormones, and even milk.
HMOs.
Even milk. And we know how bad is the overproduction of milk in the United States. That is something that I think the TTIP can definitely help to solve for American producer, to bring in the European Union some of these products that now European Union are protected, are prevented to be imported, based on unproven analysis, biological and medical analysis that have been done. So I think that is an important field. On the other side, I would say Europeans are very concerned. Just recently, I work in the railway industry. Recently, Obama administration passed what it's called the FAST Act, and the FAST Act increased the percentages of Buy America products in the transportation business. Of course, Europeans, they don't only want to come to the United States to bid on public works and public jobs and offer the technology, but they, of course, would like to some relaxation with these Buy America requirements. Instead, the trend now is to increase the percentage of Buy America. The volumes, are pretty big of trade that we are talking about. We are talking about probably the biggest GDP in the world, I guess, when we combine European Union and United States. So the economical consideration, especially if we see this as a competition to the Asian market, is definitely something that the trade representatives have in mind when they deal with this trade agreement. I have to say that, however, there is a lot of secrecy on how this agreement has been negotiated so far. There was a WikiLeaks where a lot of documents were leaked and was possible to review them, but that's what is at stake, basically. I don't know.
The technical barriers are a big issue in this, and you'd think that if we started in 1947 reducing tariffs globally, that by now we would have them down pretty far. Nick realizes that when he imports wine that we haven't eliminated them, certainly. And let me just give you some of the numbers that the two sides cite on tariff barriers that still exist. Apple growers from the US pay 7% duties when shipping to the EU. EU apple growers pay no duties on their shipment. So there's an effort. What you do is you see industry by industry, the desire and the resulting lobbying that comes from that desire to have the tariffs reduced to help them. If you look at olive oil, now I'm not sure that all of us think that U.S. olive oil competes that well with Italian olive oil, but U.S. olive oil is subject to a per ton duty of $1,680 going into the EU. EU olive oil is subject to a per ton duty of $34 coming into the US. On the European side, they look at others. On dairy products, US duties on some dairy products are 140%. On peanuts, they're 130%. Okay, that's pretty significant if you're trying to import those goods. Differences for cars. EU duties on imports from the US, 10%. US duties on imports from the EU, 2.5%. is that fair? If we look at our automobile industry and think about jobs in our automobile industry, and we think about, and then we criticize these trade agreements, when the goal of the trade agreement is to bring down that duty so that we can ship more cars to the U.S. than we did. You have to think about that. 2 points. You ask about disputes.
That's where I was just going to go. Who resolves?
Yeah, but let me back up just a little bit so we think about the kind of context of this. This is one of those areas where the rules, the legal rules, are based upon economic theory. And the economic theory that has prevailed is what is called comparative advantage theory, but the end result of application of that theory is the idea that the more you trade and the more open the borders, the more everybody benefits. Now the problem with that is that the more trade agreements we've had, you can track it and you can pretty easily prove that the more you reduce the barriers to trade, the more you increase trade, the more you benefit the economies of every state that's involved, every nation that's involved in those trade agreements. The problem is not the lack of benefits from the trade agreement. The problem is the lack of equitable distribution of those benefits. And what naturally happens is that different industries are affected in different ways in different places. And if you can move somebody from one job to another very quickly, then that's just fine. If you can't do that, as we saw with steel workers in Pittsburgh in the 1980s, then it's not just fine. So you have to ask more than one question in the process here. What are the disputes? Well, the disputes can come out of two things. One can be these technical barriers. And if technical barriers are applied in a way that creates disparate treatment between the local industry and the industry on the other side of the Atlantic, then the government there can bring that dispute against the government here. And that's state-to-state dispute resolution. And that's a process.
State to state or nation to nation.
Nation to nation, yeah. And that's a process, yeah, in this context, nation to nation. That's a process that has developed quite well from 1947 in the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade through the WTO. And the US and the EU and all the member states of the EU are quite accustomed to using that kind of a system of dispute resolution and abiding by the results. The dispute resolution part of it that creates problems with and complaints about trade agreements is more in the investment side of it. And it's when an investor invests in one of the other trading partner countries, they are given rights under the agreement. And they are given rights of national treatment. They are given rights not to have their property expropriated either directly or by regulation. And then you get one or two examples globally where that is put in a bad light and everybody starts to run away with it. And let me give you
Please give us an example.
The one global example that did it. Philip Morris brought an action, brought arbitration under a free trade agreement against Australia for local regulations that required larger warnings on packages of cigarettes. And they claimed that because that would reduce their profit, that was in effect a regulatory expropriation, a taking of their investment. Now, in the end, Australia won that case, but it's like a lot of other, and lawyers in the room know that about the urban legends that build up around different kinds of tort cases and other cases, but this was one where lots of states looked at that and said, look, even if they lost, it took a whole lot of time. It threatened a whole lot of other regulations that they were trying to impose, and it cost them a whole lot of money to engage in that dispute resolution. And so Brazil doesn't enter into any agreements with investor-state arbitration in it. Singapore, Indonesia have taken that out. They've they've got, and Australia has backed off of their bilateral trade agreement, about bilateral investment agreements that have that kind of dispute resolution. Now, in the TTIP, Europe has tabled an alternative to that, because what happens in that kind of arbitration, or the criticism of it, result from not just the ability of a private party to bring this type of case, but they result from the fact that it's arbitration, that the arbitrators are selected in a process where you aren't sure what their background is always. You can get their background, but then they make the decisions in within confidential boundaries that are seen traditionally as one of the benefits of arbitration. But when they do that, and a government is involved, you lose the element of transparency. You add cost. You may add delay to the process, and you take away predictability, because you may have different arbitrators for one case than you have for another, and exactly the same issues, and they decide them differently. So what Europe has proposed is a two-step investment dispute court system. And there would be 15 judges in the court of first instance, 5 from the US, 5 from Europe, 5 from somewhere else, and 6 judges in an appellate review body, 2 from the US, 2 from Europe, and 2 for somewhere else. But you would have people who would be chosen by the states to be on these panels and on retainer to be there, so that you would start to develop predictability in the process. You would have more transparency in the process. The states, as they are starting to do with, or the nations, as they're starting to do with nation-to-nation dispute resolution, would make the process more open and transparent. And the hope is you would have more predictability, and you wouldn't have the kind of cases that Philip Morris brought against Australia.
So let's transfer that into another film. Let's turn back to Phil for a moment. Energy. It moves in trade, correct?
Yes.
And this state has changed dramatically with energy. And even though you're working on gasoline and oil that's coming in, you found new sources of your oil, correct?
Right.
If I recall, it used to come from West Africa or East Africa?
West.
West Africa. And now you're getting it from Dakotas?
So we've gone through a cycle, right? So at the time, one of the issues that caused problems for the predecessor is they got themselves locked into a single supply chain, and they could take foreign crude, waterborne foreign crude, was the only source. And when those crudes became out of market, they had no alternatives, and they were suffering, right? So we came in, and we were at the front end of this crude by rail revolution, which helped the Bakken fields in North Dakota to develop. We built the largest, fastest, best of its kind crude by rail delivery system in 2015. 20% of the entire production of North Dakota came into our facilities in Philadelphia.
We hope that.
Yes, you did, and we thank you. But that also,
Oh, Pennsylvania through your taxes.
right? But energy is the most global industry that there is, and that exerted pressure, and that was pressure on foreign crude oil's prices. They didn't like getting locked out of the markets, and so they did what any market does. Prices began to adjust, and so now prices on those foreign crudes have come down, and so it leaves a company like mine in a position of being able to have a flexible crude supply. Where's the best deal of the moment? Is it domestic crude by rail? Is it foreign crude by water? Is it the only thing that we can't do is take domestic crude by water, because no matter how bad the non-tariff barriers are between the U.S. and the EU, they're much worse between the U.S. and the U.S. And anyone who has any familiarity with the Jones Act will understand why. So transportation, I can't buy crude oil by ship from the Gulf Coast. You can ship it from Houston to Rotterdam today for $1.25 a barrel, or you could ship it from Houston to Philadelphia for $8 a barrel. You pick your choice.
Because of the Jones Act.
Because of the Jones Act. crazy.
At the same time, next door to you, we saved the shipyard.
Yep.
And what used to be the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, then it was the Acker Shipyard, is producing Jones Act ships to transport crude from Alaska down to the West Coast and into the facility. So again, government gets in the way of itself. Could you just go to one of the islands in the Caribbean, buy it there, and bring it up?
So they don't have that, you know, and St. Croix has had an operation in St. Croix that was given very special status at a time, so it was exempt from the Jones Act. And so when they refined there, that had an exemption, that was the principal asset, but that refinery is closed and shuttered.
So, but let's take it to the other form of energy from oil, and that's natural gas. And you become very involved in natural gas.
So I kind of helped to create, and I chair something that we call the Greater Philadelphia Energy Action Team, which is just another expression of something called the Natural Gas Energy Hub. And when Andrea CANEPARI talks about building bridges, this is really the bridge. This is an energy bridge. And it's a concept that has at its root, how do you get more economic value out of the Marcellus than is currently possible? So if you're a producer in the Marcellus right now, you're constrained by the market. Market price, the places where you can get that natural gas to go, particularly the dry natural gas, methane, you know, you pretty much have to go in the pipelines that take it up into New England or down into the U.S. Gulf Coast. Going into a heating market, that's a market that's glutted. The way you get in is you fight for market share, so you keep cutting price. And you know what happens when you cut your price? The other guy doesn't like not eat either, so he cuts his price, you know, and you get in that little pricing spiral. And that's the kind of situation you have. So how do you get out of that pricing spiral? And how do you do something where you create genuine comparative advantage? And that's the place that is so exciting from a potential perspective in here. We have such enormous supplies of this resource in Pennsylvania. You measure it in centuries. And you have
Measure it in
centuries of reserves. You know, this whole idea of sustainability gets a little bit wonky when you start talking about, well, I don't know, is 200 years sustainable? You know, I don't know. For me, it is. But it's a lot of stuff in there. How do you get that to market? How do you create a new market which doesn't have to take price and drive it into the ground, but can thrive on good, long-term, stable prices? And that's the industry that takes these molecules, whether they're methane, ethane, propane, butane, pentane, those are the key players in here, and you upgrade them in big processing factories, and you make essentially chemical kind of compounds out of them. You might convert methane into ammonia and convert that into urea, which is a great fertilizer product, or you might make methanol, which then is a precursor for lots of other chemistry for things including synthetic transportation fuels. Or like Shell is doing here in Western PA, you can crack the ethane and make ethylene, which then becomes stuff that goes into the plastic bottles. Or we're taking propanes now, we're starting fledgling taking propanes into Philadelphia for export, take that energy advantage in here. And we're trying to create that system, and what's the problem? That bridge does not exist. Those molecules can't move without pipelines, and the creation of a pipeline system is a very, very difficult thing. You have a case in point here right now, not only at a national level with the present administration frustrating the XL pipeline for moving Canadian crudes, but you have right here in the Commonwealth. Sunoco Logistics has been working on a project called Mariner East 2. That's a project to to bring kind of propane from the Marcellus into Marcus Hook, and they've been working on this now for 4 years. And the permit application now is, I'm not lying, I'm not exaggerating, there's not a piece of hyperbole in here, it's 30,000 pages long. What kind of a permit is 30,000 pages long? No one reads 30,000 pages. That's a clear indication that there are people who are tossing up, in the language of this international commerce, non-tariff barriers, you know, just as they're like tossing logs out of the back of a truck to try to frustrate the process as that goes on. And that's pretty costly. Now, to the benefit of the lawyers in the room, $40 million has been spent on lawyers in that process for them. But it's an issue. In Texas, they started a project, similar size, 300-mile pipeline at the same time, and from start to beginning, 2 years, permitted, built, in service. Molecules are moving. 4 years, $40 million, 30,000 pages. So we have to do something that helps create a better environment, and that's a pipeline for which, by the way, 90-some-odd% of it, they already own the right-of-way. It's not a right-of-way issue. It's a permit issue, even in their own right-of-way.
So Phil, when that gets done, and that gas is going through, and it's gas, natural gas, it's going to get over to your Philadelphia energy hub. And you and I have talked about an energy hub, and frankly, I'd like to see an energy hub here and an energy hub in Philadelphia. Can we get that energy to Andrea over in Italy in some value-added form?
Sure. So there are lots of value adds to go. So already through, there's an existing one very small pipeline that has brought some ethane. The first cargoes of ethane has left Philadelphia and it's gone over to Europe, where it's being cracked in Europe.
Liquefied?
Liquefied, you know, ethane comes in, it's liquefied, very cold, very big ships. The propane, if you're following the energy markets here, you'll notice that the value of propane has gone up in the last 6 months relative to the basic wellhead price of natural gas. And that's gone up specifically because the export markets for that propane have been developed in here, and we're beginning to export some of that out through Philadelphia, and some is exported out of the Gulf Coast. And those are going into Latin American and into European markets, where this is still a very good energy deal to have. And there's more of that to do with propane. I mean, the visions for the future are great. You know, there are companies doing business like Braschem, who are doing the polypropylene kind of business, just a higher value, higher quality plastic material. It needs propylene. So you can take propane and dehydrogenate it and create propylene out of that. And you know, that's one of the projects that will occur once you can get this massive movement of molecules coming forward. And Governor, not to you know, kind of cry in our beer here, but Act 13 was designed to help with that problem. Act 13 has been eviscerated. And, you know, in trying to find ways to work around that is what we're trying to develop on. The play that we're trying to work on right now is developing this energy hub idea kind of as a public-private partnership with the Commonwealth to try to get some additional buy-in from the Commonwealth that helps maybe the no fossil fuel should ever leave the ground people at some disadvantage.
How does the TTIP affect us getting our energy over there?
Getting it over there?
Yeah.
Well, it would be a combination of, on some things, as Phil says, you've got problems that don't arise from over there.
Right, there are problems here, but once we get it on a ship.
One would be the tariff, two would be the non-tariff barriers, the regulatory elements of it on the other end. And I'm not an expert in that industry, so I don't know what the tariffs are on oil and products there, if that's a problem. But
Our tariffs are not really a problem.
the third problem then is distance, and the simple price because of the distance that you have.
No, what I was thinking is this: the European Union has been, I don't know if it's changed the trend lately, but has been politically, but also for territory kind of consideration, against fracking. You know, the Europeans did not consider this as a good way to interact with the environment. There are a lot of environmentalist groups and so on. So here what I see an interesting scenario, you know, if Europeans are willing to anyhow buy the product and not the process, basically. So the process probably will still be considered forbidden or anyhow not recommended in Europe, but I don't see, probably there is a possibility that the product itself, it's something that they are definitely willing to buy. And, but if the TTIP it's approved. But it's something that, again, needs to be very, very carefully examined with the environmentalist group that are in Europe. Europe is extremely, as you know, fragile on energy point of view, because their dependency on the Russian oil and the North African oil. There are, this is the reason why they invested a lot in nuclear plants, but with all the risks that derive from nuclear plants. Italy is a country that decided by referendum to not have nuclear plants, but they buy nuclear energy from France. So this is a similar scenario to me. You know, we don't have nuclear plants here. We don't allow this because our Green Party does not allow that, but we are more than willing to buy nuclear energy from France. Here we are not allowed fracking, but we are more than willing to buy energy that is produced through a fracking process. So the other thing I have in mind, because Pennsylvania is so unique when it comes to energy, you know, technology, chemicals, and so on, if has been considered, I don't know, by the state to take an initiative on trade point of view and move forward some of the TTIP principles, you know, because the Congress, you know, the whole Congress process will be much slower, but this we know that on legal point of view there will be no issue, you know, for the trade representatives from the state to move this subject forward, kind of pushing the envelope in a way, and maybe after getting, unless they're preempted by the Congress, or they do something against the Congress, have these in place, have this instrument in place and effective before the rest of the United States. Because I think there are other states of the United States that may not be so interested in the TTIP like can be Pennsylvania, for the kind of industry and the kind of business we have here.
Yeah, there's you know, when my friends from Italy come to visit, they're always a little suspect about going to an Italian restaurant, you know, but they want to go have steak because they love that good American steak that they can't get because it's fed on GMO corn. And I can't buy a decent culatello here because we don't allow it because, I don't know, somehow it's improperly cured, right? You have that kind of ridiculousness that happens that gets in the way.
Yeah. Well, we have two significantly different approaches to regulation, and there are a number of aspects to that. The United States has used litigation for purposes of regulation and left it to that sector in some places, where Europe has used legislation instead. But the basis on which the decision to regulate is made is different too. And in the United States, on something like GMO products in the area of agriculture and food, we've moved further down that road and said in part, let's have labeling so that the consumer can decide if they want to buy it or not, but let's allow it on the market. In Europe, the approach is they use the protective principle, and basically in order to move something forward, you have to say, well, you have to prove there is no harm before you can do it, and it's very similar in the fracking area. Two very different approaches to regulation, and I'm not talking about whether one is better than the other or not, but one of the aspects of the TTIP is to try to harmonize the regulatory process so that you come closer together on that, so that these types of differences themselves are not the barriers. And it would seem to me that that could be an extremely valuable part of that process, assuming that we could come together somewhere in the middle on a process that would bring some harmonization to those efforts. And the GMO issue and the fracking issue are two examples of where we're quite far apart.
So on the fracking issue, I feel duty-bound to say, well, we've been fracking for 50 years. There are no incidents. The entire anti-fracking rhetoric stems from one very badly made movie that told a lie, and that was pretty clear about the burning water. But it's a good thing for the United States that the Europeans don't want to fracture. Let them have no energy. They'll buy it from here. It's a
Great
good
for
thing.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's great for Pennsylvania. Right. But at the end of the day, no one chooses not to take energy. So we're not going to be confused by that. No one ever chooses. When the policy comes down to, do you get to go out tonight or not go out tonight? Do you have light tonight? Do you have heat tonight? Do you get to fly to Mallorca? Nothing. No one's going to give up not one drop of that.
Do you
somebody
use
franked
your
it.
internet?
Yeah,
Tonight.
you want to use their internet. So, I mean, that will come. That will come. Those energy molecules will come into play when they are, because there are great structures in Poland. There are great structures in and around the North Sea in the UK that are probably fracturable. But we have been fracturing for half a century.
Two comments, and I forget who said it. Maybe Russia plays into this in the whole energy thing, and it is having a tremendous impact on what's going on over in Europe right now. And I think part of the reason that Putin may be doing what he's doing is he sees what we can do with energy if we really start getting our energy over into countries like France desperately needs energy, Germany needs energy, Britain needs energy, Italy needs energy, and they have the spigot. And they see us as a tremendous threat when it comes to that. Second point I'll make, again, on energy, and then we're going to go and get towards the wrapping this up and leaving room for questions, and get to a little more fun side, is I took another trade mission in 2013 to Brazil and Chile. We took a little bit longer time. We went to the wine region of Chile also. Had a very nice time there, had some very good wines. But I had an opportunity to meet with the then president of Chile, Pina, was his name. And it was supposed to be 20 minutes. It was an hour and 20 minutes. 20 minutes was the ceremonial shake hands, exchange gifts, all of that. 1 hour is all he wanted to talk about was how do we get our energy from Pennsylvania, because he knew all about us, down to Chile. Because they are dependent upon, I think it's Argentina, and they hate Argentina. They've got to come up over the Andes. They hate them. They don't rely on them. They are an asset-rich country, but an energy-poor country. And I told them we were going to continue to work on it because I'd like to see us getting right out of Philadelphia through the Panama and on down to Chile. The other reason I wanted to see that, if you think of the geopolitical side of it, Chile is probably one of our greatest allies in South America, in a continent just south of us, that could be in some turmoil. And the more that we could lock them in as an ally, and you do that with energy, is a very important aspect. So enough for that. Let's talk a little bit about Chow Philadelphia.
May I just tell you something which you might find interesting? There's a company called Northville Industries, and maybe 25 years ago, they were progressive, and right adjacent to the Panama Canal, they built a pipeline to move crude oil, because in those days, we were getting a lot of crude imported from Asia, Indonesian crudes, and that pipeline has now been reversed, and crudes are moving out to the Pacific from the
American crude. Andre?
Can I add something also about the benefit of harmonization from a political point of view? Another benefit.
Time. Let's get the microphone for you.
Another benefit of TTIP, echoing was Professor Brand was saying before, of harmonization, is that TTIP is making efforts to create common standards. And why is it important? Europe and Italy and the US are very allies since the beginning. We have common values. We are friends. we have to be even more concerned, about the situation worldwide. So if we create together common standards for the sector of the future, such as energy, life science, and so on, we are kind of creating a model, and then the other economies in the world will have to follow us. I mean, it's especially important here in Pittsburgh. You're a city of innovation and technology. So it's important if we do that together rather than let other part of the world create the standards and then we have to follow them.
Ciao Philadelphia is here today. If I may ask both Andrea and you, Phil, explain Ciao Philadelphia to the Pittsburghers here that are attending this, and then I want to ask you about your Italian Cultural Month over there, okay?
Yes, I think it's important to raise awareness about opportunity. This is a great region, a lot of great people. We have economic giants, great leaders, but we are not so recognized for what we can do together. That's why I showed that video about Italy. Sometimes there are some people that think about an old image of Italy, maybe an image of Italy that never existed. So that's important, because if we want a marriage, an economic, an academic, whatever, a cultural one, we have to let the two partners at least be aware of their existence. So that's why it's important to have an Italian Cultural Month, or this initiative to raise awareness, let people understand, and try to be innovative. I remember an interesting conversation with Governor CORBETT in Harrisburg, and I was mentioning a very charming top Italian small village, but that everybody knows, and that they were looking for a twinning with a sister city agreement with a city in the US. And Governor CORBETT said, well, what about Pittsburgh, because they both have hills? And at the beginning I said, wow, that's very unusual idea, because a small village with Pittsburgh. But then I thought that's a smart idea, and we would have had publicity. I imagine stories from the New York Times, Pittsburgh and a small village, but a top, charming, and well-known one. And these kind of stories, without paying PR agency, are important, because they give people, ideas to how to work together. Sometimes internationally, where do they go? That they go to New York, that they do trade missions. Governor is very expert. They go to Manhattan. And what can you achieve in Manhattan? You are so small. Nothing. If you come to Pittsburgh, to Pennsylvania, you have a very welcoming settings. We have great business leaders. You have lawyers. And really, you can do something useful for yourself and for everybody. So that's why it's important for me to create these opportunities of public diplomacy.
Phil, ciao Philadelphia.
So, by quirk of the calendar, I think Andrea and I kind of arrived in Philadelphia in more or less the same time, about 4 years ago, and it's my extraordinary privilege to know and be associated, because this is a genuine Energizer bunny here who has, kind of invigorated. Andrea is everywhere, and for the month, this cultural month of October, there is a kind of a narrow Columbus Day historical kind of a celebration in this country, which has become very distorted now and very, in my mind, a little bit corrupted in terms of what it is and what it's trying to do, and the kind of snarkiness that it brings out. And the consulate has said, one day, one man, one achievement, that's crazy. This is a culture that has given so much to the world. It doesn't need a day, it needs a month. It needs a month to talk about that and to get people involved and so I'm very happy as a kind of an Italian-American businessman to help do all of these promotions and do that, because things will click into place. Things will happen and bridges will be built I don't know if any of you have gone to the kind of National Italian American Federation due in Washington. It was the weekend before last. NIAF does a fantastic job. It's not one of these organizations that kind of complains about this and complains about that. It's about what are the real accomplishments of real people doing right now and how do you link them on both sides. And that's the same kind of thing that's happening now in this CHOW Philadelphia, trying to build those bridges, and they can happen. We're going to see it in the energy field, right? Eni has already publicly said they're pulling their major amount of capital out of Africa, you know what I'm saying? And they're going to redeploy that capital in the U.S. because this is a much better energy market to kind of go and develop it. And something else will fall out of that over time, and there'll be more and more things like that. And this CHOW Philadelphia is doing a great job in helping promote those connections.
Well received by the Italian community in Philadelphia, and by the Italian Americans, and by non-Italian Americans, I would assume, too.
They always come out for the wine.
As long as it's his wine. We're down to about the last 10 minutes here, and the question is, do you have questions? Chuck? Speak up, because we need a, wait a second, here we go. Here goes the microphone.
Yeah, one of the goals of the TTIP is regulatory compatibility. You take pesticides as an example. How will that type of compatibility be assessed? For example, the standards in the EU are much more strict than the standards in the United States. Would the U.S. need to have more stringent standards to meet that compatibility? And as we know, those are federal laws and regulations in the United States, so that would take acts of Congress and, of course, approval by the President to, in essence, make it law. Or would the EU need to, in essence, lessen its standards? And if so, that could create a health issue, I would think, for the EU. And then who decides what is compatible? That's sort of my question.
No, this is, yeah, you are right. This is one of the main issues. I can speak for my industry, you know, and in my industry we have what are called the CENELEC norms that are very stringent safety rules when it comes to railway technology. The reason it's easy, you know, United States railroad system, it's based, has been founded by freight railroads that go, you know, 30 miles per hour, 50 miles per hour. The European railroad system is a passenger railroad system. So a lot of people, a lot of safety hazards, plus they go very fast. So the CENELEC, which is this, you know, group of engineers, of railway engineers, they come up with so many standards and technical rules. And Americans go crazy when they see all these rules. So what the TTIP will try to do, upon request of course, United States, is to have our, US engineers working with European engineers in the development of these rules, because these rules are not written in the stone. You know, they will change and they will adapt. So the idea, like Professor Brand was saying, is to come up with the same kind of methodology so that we can work together and not try to impose one standard, one rule to the other party. It will never work that way. The way that these things can work together, if we have a starting point, we create a baseline, and we start to work together to come up with rules together. That's, I think, is the secret of the success of the TTIP. If we leave Americans or Europeans work in a room in silos on their rules and after try to explain why they are the best rules, we will never reach an agreement, I think.
Yeah, and I don't think that this will be a part of the text of the TTIP to begin with, nor will be an immediate result after the agreement. What will happen is when new regulations are written, there will be consultation to try to conform. When old regulations come up for review, there will be consultation to try to reform. So it won't be an immediate process, I don't think, at least in terms of what there is out there about the text that is being considered at this point. But it will be that effort to, as we move forward, particularly bring new rules and new regulations closer together.
Other questions?
If TTIP does move forward, what happens to the UK now?
That's a good question.
I think they're out.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, the New York Times has been reporting, one of the problems with TTIP, as we know from both sides, is the negotiators can negotiate it. And if you've been involved in these kinds of negotiations, you work really hard with people, you come back, and then the negotiation at home can be harder than the negotiation there. But once you get a text, we've seen in the presidential election the rhetoric about new trade agreements. And so we can ask what happens. Europe has an agreement like this with Canada. It was all ready to go until 3.5 million people in Wallonia out of 300 million plus, or 500. How many, what's the population of the EU now? Population of the EU now.
508, I think.
508 million. 3.5 million people out of 508 million were able to say it's not going to go forward because a group of the dairy industry in Wallonia was worried about what it would do to their business, okay? And so this is a tough area. It's a really tough area to make it work in the process.
Any other question? Yes?
Curious, given the problems with both NAFTA and the Pacific trade, what are the real chances of having the partnership transatlantic?
Well, let me ask the question this way. How NAFTA and transatlantic, I make an observation is politically, everybody that is opposed to it says we lost a lot of jobs because they went to countries that the wages are so much lower. I don't know that that would be the same in something between the EU and the United States, that the wages are that much lower. I don't know what the wages are in the EU, but I would think they would be somewhat comparable. So that side of it probably is a little bit less. Agreeing on what is to be said, what the rules are, is always going to be a problem. Professor?
Well, that brings up what I think is probably one of the most important elements of the trade agreements, and it hasn't been mentioned at all here, and that's national security. The move after World War II to globalize trade and to create the EU, the main purpose for that was not trade, it was to prevent another war between Germany and France. Has it worked? I think you can say it's worked pretty darn well. If you've traveled in the former Yugoslavia, the Balkans, okay, and you look at the magnet effect of the EU with Serbia, Kosovo, Bosnia wanting to get into the EU, with Croatia, Slovenia in the EU, I can say that my impression is there would have been more wars there without the magnet effect of the EU. There would have been more refugees coming across the Adriatic to Italy without those trade agreements, okay? And so, and if we compare it to NAFTA, we hear comments about one issue and another issue separated from each other. But let's take the question of a wall at the border and getting rid of NAFTA. Well, why are people coming from south of the border wanting to get into the United States? I mean, if you travel in Latin America and you visit these people in small towns, you find their families there. They don't want to leave there. They leave because there are no jobs there, because there's no life. So you can't say, let's take the jobs away from them and then let's put up a wall at the border. I mean, these are related issues, okay? And there are not easy solutions to these, but I think that the national security issue is one that you need to think of here. And if you look at the last 70 years, from the end of World War II, okay, and you ask, have these agreements made a difference in that respect? I think the answer is pretty clear. And then you ask, well, are these agreements of value? And I think, yeah, they really are, beyond just the economic theory that goes into them.
Also, if I can add, we don't have to forget what is happening in Asia. You know, Asia is finding different venues than WTOs, than you know, International Monetary Fund and World Bank. They are building their own institution, and they are signing up their own agreements. If we miss this chance, this may impact dramatically the Western economies, because the Asian economies are growing faster, I would say, than expected, and they are signing this kind of agreement between them. So all this fear to not move forward, of course, you know, agree on maybe on different terms, but agree on something and try to get closer and building bridges, may bring the risk that on economic point of view, Europe and United States lose the chance of being competitive, you know, with Asia, and we start a completely new era at that point.
Last question. Okay.
Based what you said on the imbalance of tariffs between the European nations and the U.S., and things are working for them, what would be the incentive for them to raise the U.S. tariffs on exporting products from here and to lowering their tariffs on products coming from Europe to the United States? What would be their incentive?
Yeah, this has been the question throughout the process of tariff reductions in the GATT and the WTO and elsewhere. And what happens is you're not just thinking about tariffs on apples or olive oil, you're thinking about the whole package. And so Europe will come to the U.S. and say, these are the ones we want reduced. U.S. will come to Europe and say, these are what we want to have reduced, and then you trade off. And on a single industry basis, are there winners and losers? Yeah. Okay. On an economy basis, you try to come out equally. That goes back to you create benefits for the economy, then the question is, how do you equitably distribute those benefits within the economy? That's something we haven't worked out well yet. Yeah, yep, absolutely. Well, yeah. Yeah. Well, at the same time, you have the political process, and there has to be buy-in, and the Americans can't trade off certain tariffs for nothing, and neither can the Europeans, because if they do, the Wallonian example, the dairy industry in the south of Belgium will frustrate the whole thing. Yeah.
No, but the issue, if I may add, on the tariffs problem, what is creating, you know, having higher tariffs is creating protectionism. Protectionism is creating more burden for consumers. So eventually, you know, this CIP, what it's trying to do is to lower these. So at the end of the day, who will benefit will be the people, you know, will be the consumers. You know, I remember the case of the tires, that President Obama, you know, promised this to the tire manufacturers. So he issued this measure protections for tires so they could not be imported from China because we put very high tariffs, and we started to give works and jobs to our tire manufacturer. It costed to the community something like you know, a couple of $1 billion. Because you increase so at the end of the day, it's try to open the eyes to the overall economic community, and come to reasonable, you know, tariffs if there is a reasonable tariff, and avoid these externalities, you know, these costs.
I'd add something to that point.
Real quick, Phil, because
Really, very quick, because it's just very quick, you know, from the conservative guy over here. But, you know, a lot of blame gets focused on wages and low wages paid in developing countries, and that may have been true 20 years ago or 25 years ago, but it's utter rubbish right now. Wages in China and in Asia are very, very compatible. The reason those economies are growing are very, very simple, is they are not regulated into death. They are encouraged to grow. So if you want to build a factory, you can go there and build that factory, or you can go here and spend a couple of years trying to build that factory. You know, and that's
Or
the difference.
$30,000 for a pipeline, pages for a pipeline.
I want to thank Governor Corbett for a great job of moderating. I want to thank the rest of the panelists. For a very interesting discussion that I hope will continue with all of you on the second floor, more informally, over a good glass of Italian wine. Or beer.
And I believe it's your word.
It's my wine, yes.
And it's Nick's wine, so thank you, Nick.